In a house where wealth covered shame, the truth crept in through the back gate, and soon slept in every room. Ilara knew the shame before she knew its name. It was a silence that hung in the air of the manor, heavier than the velvet drapes that suffocated the sunlight. It clung to the polished silver and the bone china, a faint, bitter scent that no amount of lemon polish could erase. It was in the way her mother, an impossibly elegant woman named Vivian, never met her father's eyes at the dinner table. It was in the hushed conversations behind closed study doors, the low murmurs that ceased the moment Ilara's shadow fell across the hallway. Ilara was a porcelain daughter, crafted and curated for display. Her hands were always soft, her posture always straight, her voice a gentle, modulated whisper. She was a work of art, a perfect accessory to the family's wealth, but there was no life beneath the glaze. She felt hollow, an empty vessel filled with lessons on embroidery, piano, and the proper way to receive a suitor. Her mother taught her to present a perfect surface to the world, but never how to feel beneath it. A woman's beauty is her strength, Ilara, Vivian would say, her fingers tracing the line of Ilara's jaw. But her true power lies in her essence, the way she draws a man in with her very being. The promise of warmth, of a hearth fire within her soul. Ilara would nod, a perfect empty gesture. She understood the words, but they were a language spoken in a foreign land. When the carefully chosen suitors came to call, she was a statue. They spoke of politics and poetry, and she offered the perfect, learned responses, but there was no spark, no essence, as her mother called it. She was polite, she was beautiful, she was faultless. And she was utterly, entirely cold. The first crack in her porcelain shell came on a rainy Tuesday. She had been sent to fetch a forgotten shawl from her mother's sitting room, a room where she was rarely allowed unsupervised. A heavy oak door separated it from the rest of the wing. As she reached for the handle, she heard the low, urgent tones of her mother's voice. "She's a beautiful girl, doctor, I grant you that," Vivian said, her voice tight with a frustration Ilara had never heard before. "But she has no fire. She is a winter garden. Barren. Cold. The men, they are charmed for a moment, but then they see it. The lack of womanhood in her. A porcelain doll is not a wife. A porcelain doll cannot give you grandchildren." The doctor's voice was a low hum, unintelligible, but Vivian's next words struck Ilara like a physical blow. "There's a difference between a proper lady and a real woman, doctor. One can be taught. The other must be felt. And Ilara feels nothing. I fear she is simply not a real woman." Ilara's world, built on the fragile foundation of her mother's approval, shattered. She backed away from the door, her heart a frantic, panicked bird trapped inside her ribs. Not a real woman. The words echoed in the cavernous halls of her mind. All her life, she had striven for perfection, for the silent nod of her mother's approval, and now she understood the unspoken truth. It was never enough. All her accomplishments were hollow. Her quiet dignity was a sign of her failure, her grace a mask for her emptiness. She felt a dizzying emptiness, a void where her identity should be. Was her mother right? Was she an imposter, a ghost haunting her own body? The thought was a poison that seeped into her bones, chilling her to the core. 4 days she moved through the manor like a phantom. She ate her meals without tasting them. She played the piano, but the music sounded brittle, hollow. She looked at her reflection and saw a stranger, a beautiful, empty stranger whose hands, so soft and pale, felt foreign to her. They were hands that had never toiled, never struggled, never held anything but delicate teacups and the spines of leather-bound books. They were not the hands of a real woman. And that's when she thought of Silas. Silas, the Gatesman. He was an extension of the house's property, a necessary but silent fixture. She saw him from a distance every morning as the car drove her to town for her daily lessons. His broad shoulders hunched over a broom, his face smudged with dirt. He was a creature of a different world, a world of sweat and soil and the raw, unpolished truth of physical labor. His hands, she had noticed once when he was fixing the latch on the main gate, were rough, lined with calluses, the nails stained with earth. They were alive. They were real. The gatehouse was a squat, stone building nestled just inside the manor's boundary wall. It was a place she was never meant to go. A place her mother had always subtly, and not so subtly, warned her away from. "That is his space, Ilara," Vivian had said once, her voice laced with a subtle disdain. "A man's private domain is not a place for a lady." Ilara heard her mother's voice in her head, a cold whisper of warning, but the words only fueled the frantic fire of her need. If her own world, a world of hushed elegance, had judged her and found her lacking, then perhaps the truth she sought lay outside of it. Perhaps it lay in the very place she was forbidden to go. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and damp, smelling of wet earth and crushed leaves. Dusk was settling, a soft, bruised purple bleeding across the sky. The manor, a sprawling behemoth of gray stone, looked cold and forbidding behind her. She was wearing a simple wool dress, practical for the chill of the evening, not the silks and satins of her daily life. It felt like a costume, a desperate attempt to shed her skin. She walked the long, winding path to the gatehouse, her feet crunching on the gravel. Every step felt like a rebellion. She had never been alone like this, never ventured beyond the manicured lawns and the watchful eyes of the staff. The silence of the evening was broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the frantic beat of her own heart. The gatehouse was smaller than she remembered, a single room with a smoke-stained chimney. A dim, yellow light glowed from the single window, a beacon in the gathering gloom. She could see his silhouette through the glass, hunched over a book at a small wooden table. He was reading. The thought was a strange one. She had not expected that. She had expected him to be doing something Gatesman-like, fixing something, oiling a hinge. But he was reading, and suddenly he didn't feel so alien. She reached the door, a heavy thing of scarred, dark wood. She raised her hand to knock, but her fist hung suspended in the air. What would she say? What could she possibly say to him? "Hello, I am Elara, the porcelain daughter of the manor, and I've come for you to make me a real woman?" The thought was so absurd it was almost laughable if she hadn't felt so close to tears. A tremor ran through her. Her mother's voice was a ghost at her back, whispering of decorum and propriety. But a deeper, more primal voice, a voice she had never heard before, was screaming inside her. "Prove it. Prove you are not a doll. Prove you can feel something. Prove you are a woman." She took a deep breath, the damp air cool and sharp in her lungs. She lowered her hand and simply pushed the door open. It creaked in protest, a small, loud sound that felt like a crack in the silence of her life. Silas looked up from his book. He had dark, thick hair that fell over his brow and a tired but gentle look in his deep-set eyes. He was older than she had thought, perhaps by a decade, with a kind of quiet stillness about him that was utterly foreign to her world. He didn't look startled, just waiting, as if he had known on some level that she would come. He closed the book and set it aside. "Miss Elara," he said, his voice a low rumble that felt like a vibration in the air. "Is everything all right?" His voice was not the polite, polished tones of her suitors. It was rough with the accent of a man who worked with his hands, but it held a quiet authority, a deep well of calm that was both intimidating and deeply comforting. He called her Miss Elara, a title of respect, but in his eyes she saw not a porcelain doll, not a rich man's daughter, but simply Elara, just a woman standing in his doorway. And in that moment she knew she had come to the right place. Her world, with its grand facades and suffocating expectations, had judged her and found her wanting. His world, a single humble room filled with the scent of wood smoke and old books, offered her the one thing she craved, a truth that was not shrouded in shame. She stepped over the threshold, closing the door behind her. The sound of the latch clicking into place felt like a definitive end, a final goodbye to the house and the life she had known. "No, Silas," she said, her voice a little shaky, a little louder than a whisper, but it was her own. "Nothing is all right." And she looked at him, at his kind, patient face, and she knew she had to begin. She had to learn how to be a woman, even if she had to burn her old life to the ground to do it. Silas didn't look scared or surprised. He just looked at her with calm eyes. The little room was warm. It smelled of wood smoke and a kind of sweet, strong tea. The fire in the small fireplace made a soft, crackling sound. It was very different from the big, quiet cold of her home. He pulled a wooden chair closer to the fire. "Come in, Miss Elara. You're wet from the path." Elara sat down. The chair was old and a little hard, not soft like the fancy chairs in her house. It felt real. He poured a dark liquid from a pot into a small cup. He didn't ask her if she wanted it. He just gave it to her. "It's coffee," he said. "Keeps the cold out." She took a sip. It was strong and hot. It made her feel alive. She felt her body start to warm up, first her hands, then her chest. Silas sat in a chair across from her. He didn't rush her to speak. He just sat there, waiting, as if her sad words had a right to take their time. Finally she spoke. The words came out shaky. "My mother," she said, "I am not a real woman." Silas didn't say anything for a moment. He just watched the fire. "She said I am a doll," Elara continued, her voice getting a little stronger. "She said I have no fire inside me, no warmth, that I am empty, and I think she is right." He looked at her hands holding the cup. "Your hands are clean," he said. "Soft." She looked at her hands too. "They've never done anything." "Doing things is how you get to know the world," Silas said. His voice was low and easy, like the sound of a deep river. "You can't feel the world if you don't touch it." He didn't say, "Your mother is wrong." He didn't say, "You're not empty." He just gave her a different way to think about it. "She says I don't feel things," Ilara said, a tear finally falling onto her cheek. "I don't know how." Silas nodded slowly. "Feeling isn't just in your head. It's in your hands and your body. It's the cold of the morning, the heat of the sun on your back. It's what happens when you work for something." He stood up and went to a small table in the corner. He came back with a small, flat stone and a sharp knife. The knife was old and looked used. The handle was dark wood. "The real world is not a book," he said. "It's this. This knife is dull. Cannot cut wood, not well. To make it useful, you have to work. You have to rub it against this stone. The cold of the steel, the rough of the stone. You do it over and over." He showed her with his hands, his big, rough fingers holding the knife. "It takes time. It takes work. But in the end, it is sharp. It is strong. It is real. And the one who made it that way, they know what they did. They feel the power in it." He put the knife and the stone on the table in front of her. "Your first lesson, Miss Ilara?" Ilara looked at the simple tools. Her mother would have been angry. The sharp metal, the dirty stone. She was meant for things of silk and gold. But here, in this warm, small room, these things felt important. They felt honest. She picked up the knife. It was heavier than she thought. The metal was cold. She held it and felt the weight of it in her hand. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was holding something that had a purpose, a job to do. Silas didn't look at her. He just sat and looked at the fire. He was giving her space. He was letting her choose. Ilara took the small stone in her other hand. It was rough against her soft skin. She put the knife on it and began to rub, just as he had showed her. The sound was soft and scraping. She worked for a long time. Her arm began to feel a little tired. A small ache grew in her wrist. The cold of the knife and the rough of the stone were the only things in the world. She thought of her mother's words, "Not a real woman," and she rubbed the knife with more strength. This was her answer. This simple work was her proof. The ache in her arm was not a bad feeling. It was a good feeling. It meant she was doing something. It meant her body was working. It meant she was not a doll. After a while, Silas looked over. He took the knife and held it up to the light. The edge was a little brighter. He gave it back to her. "You have to work for a long time to make it sharp, but you started. The first mark is there." Ilara looked at the knife. It was not perfect. It was still dull. But she had made the first change. She had made the first mark. She looked at Silas. He saw her, not the rich girl, not the doll, but the person who was trying. The feeling in her chest was not a fire yet. It was more like a small, warm spark. But it was there. It was real. "I can stay and work more," she said. He just nodded, a small, kind smile on his face. The first lesson has begun, and Ilara has found the start of her truth in the simple work of Silas's hands. Weeks turned into months. The green leaves outside the gatehouse window turned yellow, then red, then fell to the ground. The air grew colder, and the fire in the fireplace became the heart of the small room. Ilara spent more and more time there, away from the big, quiet house. Her lessons with Silas were not like the lessons with her tutors. There were no books or long words. Her lessons were with her hands. He taught her how to tend a small garden outside the gatehouse. The ground was hard at first. The shovel felt heavy. Her hands got dirty, and the soft skin on her fingers became a little rough. But she learned to pull the weeds out, to turn the earth, to plant seeds. She felt the warmth of the sun on her back and the cold mud on her hands. When she saw the first tiny green leaves pop out of the ground, a feeling like joy filled her. It was a new feeling. It was a real feeling. She had made something grow. He taught her how to cook. It was simple food. A soup made with vegetables from the garden. A bread baked over the fire. She learned that a little salt and a little care made things taste good. The smell of the food filled the small room, a smell of home. When she shared the food with Silas, the food felt more important than any fancy dinner in the big house. It was food she had made. It was food they shared. Ilara's body changed. Her arms and back grew a little stronger. She was tired at the end of the day, a deep, good tired that made her sleep well. Her hands were no longer pale and soft. They had lines on them and a few small cuts. They were the hands of a person who did things. They were the hands of a woman who worked. Her talks with Silas were simple too. They spoke about the weather, about the plants, about the wood for the fire. But in the quiet between the words, a deeper feeling grew. She watched him. The way his face looked in the firelight. The quiet way he read his book in the corner. The strong way he moved. He was not a Gatesman to her anymore. He was Silas. A real person full of a quiet kindness. One cold afternoon she was sitting by the fire looking at her hands. They were dirty from the garden. She smiled. For the first time she did not feel like a doll. She did not feel empty. The feeling inside her was not a small spark anymore. It was a low, steady flame. It was warm. It was her own. At that moment the door of the gatehouse opened. A woman stood there wrapped in a thick fur coat. It was her mother, Vivian. Her face was pale and her eyes were cold. She looked at Alara, at her dirty hands, at her tired clothes. Then she looked at Silas, sitting quietly across the room. Her mother's eyes were full of a terrible anger. The calm and warmth of the small room were gone, replaced by the cold, judging air of the big house. The two worlds had finally met. The air in the gatehouse changed. The warmth of the fire and the smell of home were pushed away by a cold, sharp anger. Vivian, dressed in her rich coat, stood in the doorway and looked at Alara with eyes as hard as stone. "What is this, Alara?" her mother said. Her voice was quiet, but it was a quiet that was more scary than a shout. "Look at you. Your dress is dirty. Your hands, they are a disgrace." Alara did not look away. She stood up. Her hands, with their rough skin and a bit of dirt under the nails, no longer felt like something to hide. They felt like her own. "I have been learning," Alara said. Her voice was not shaky. It was calm and steady. "Learning what?" Vivian asked, looking at Silas with a look of deep dislike. "How to live like a poor man. How to shame your family. How to live," Alara answered. "How to feel." Vivian laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "You think this is living? This small, dirty room? You have a life of comfort and grace waiting for you in that house. A life you were made for. Not this shame." "That house is not a home," Alara said. "It is a cage. And I am not empty anymore. I am not a doll." She held out her hands, showing them to her mother. "These are the hands of a woman who works. These hands made a garden grow. These hands made food for us to eat." Vivian looked at Alara's hands, then at Silas, who was still sitting by the fire, watching and listening. She saw the quiet strength in him, the way he looked at Alara not as a child but as a person. The sight made her even angrier. "You have been with this man," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a low, cold whisper. "You have forgotten every rule I taught you. You have ruined yourself for some false idea of feeling. You have slept with a Gatesman to prove you are a real woman. But all you have proven is that you are a fool." Alara looked from her mother's angry, judging face to Silas's kind, steady one. She had come to the gatehouse to prove something to her mother, to prove she was a real woman. But now she knew the truth. She didn't have to prove anything to her mother. She had already proven it to herself. She took a step toward Silas. "I am not a fool," she said. "I am a woman who has found her own truth. My life is not about your rules or your shame. My life is about here. It is about feeling the cold in my hands and the warmth of the fire. It is about making something grow with my own hands." "Then you are no longer my daughter," Vivian said. Her voice was final, a door closing forever. "You have made your choice. You will stay here in this filth, and you will not have a single penny or a single word from me again." Vivian turned and walked away. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving a cold quiet in the room. Alara stood still for a moment, listening to her mother's footsteps go away. The silence of the manor had always been a cage, but now it was a silent farewell. Silas got up and walked to her. He did not touch her, but he stood close. "That was hard," he said. Alara looked at him. The man she had come to for a lesson, for a simple act of rebellion, had become something more. He had become her home. She looked around the small, warm room. It was not fancy. It was not perfect, but it was real. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough, his palm was hard with work. It was the most honest touch she had ever known. She had come to the gatehouse to prove she was a woman. And in his quiet kindness, in the work of her own hands, in the simple truth of his life, she had found it. She was a woman not because of a man, but because she had finally chosen herself. She had chosen a life of feeling over a life of show. And that was the strongest, most real thing she had ever done.